A minute. I'm just going to go ahead and put all of these tenets of what we're going to say is biblical love this morning. I know we could add to this list, but we want to focus on these. We'll do that both in this hour and in the third hour. This morning it will be centered around Jesus, and in the third hour, Ben will talk to you about how it more pertains to your life. So I want to begin by talking about the fact that biblical love is obedient. And there's two sides to this. There's the idea that it's experiential and it's also perfect. When we think about Jesus now, and when we examine ourselves, it is both experiential and it is perfect or complete. Hebrews chapter 5, verse 8. This has always been an interesting verse to me, and I'm sure it has to you as well. Although he was a son, talking about Jesus, he learned obedience through what he suffered. Now, I don't know maybe what all of that entails, but what I know is that Jesus had to learn a thing. And he had to learn obedience through the things that he suffered. Well, I would ask you, what did Jesus suffer? And as we stand before this table this morning, and as we get ready to partake of these emblems, our minds would automatically go to the cross, where he suffered pain and humiliation and stress and strain and indignation and shame. Yeah, that's true. He did suffer all that. But when I read this verse, it seems to me that he's already achieved that level of obedience when he finds himself on the cross. My guess is that he had to learn this through living his life as a human, just like you and I have to learn obedience. Jesus had to learn that as well. I'll give you just a quick example. We don't have time to go into a deep dive of this idea, but I would say that Jesus learned obedience through the disappointment that he experienced in life, just like you and I do. John chapter 6, Jesus is in Capernaum. He's just fed the 5,000 on the other side of the lake, and now he finds himself teaching and preaching this great sermon called the Bread of Life. And what he does is he tries to get them to see what it is that's really important. And he says in verse 56 of that chapter, he says, "Whoever feeds on my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me and I abide in him." And they really struggled with that. They really struggled with that. And they didn't get it in the terms that he was trying to get them to see it. And they kind of missed the boat. And so in verse 66, we would see the disappointment that Jesus experienced when he said, "After this, many of his disciples turned back and no longer walked with him." Disappointment. Can you imagine? You're trying to help someone. You're trying to teach them about the truth. You're trying to help them be better at what it is that he's trying to get them to be better at. And he's trying to get them to see really what he is all about. And they get up, one by one, and they turn around, and they start walking out. I've never had anybody get up and walk out on me. That may happen today. Hope not. But I have felt that in a sense. I've received some texts after maybe a lesson that kind of hurt, but nothing like this. These people are just turning and walking from him when all he wants to do is help them. And you know how I know it bothered Jesus? Because of what he said next. You know it well. So Jesus said to the 12, "Do you want to go away as well?" I mean, is this where we are? Are you so dissatisfied with what I'm trying to teach that you're just going to walk away? You can just feel the disappointment in Jesus. And that had to have helped him as he learned obedience. In Matthew chapter 23, we see Jesus lamenting over Jerusalem. He sees the city from afar and he says, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often I would have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood. And you were not willing." The disappointment that Jesus must have felt. Relatively speaking, he did a lot, but he just didn't have a whole lot of people that really embraced him. And all of the difficulties of life were those things that served to help him be more obedient as he grew. Well, it's also very complete and perfect. His obedience and what we are striving to be as we want to be more like him, his obedience was perfect and complete. John chapter 8, verse 29. John would say this. He said, "He who sent me is with me. He has not left me alone, for I always do the things that are pleasing to Him. You realize that Jesus went about solely with the purpose of doing the things that pleased God, His Father. And He worked very hard at it. And we need to be, as we examine ourselves, those who are working very hard to be more like Him and motivated by the biblical love that we see as we read Scripture. Matthew chapter 26, He said, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death." He said, as He's in the Garden of Gethsemane, He says, "Remain here," to those that were with Him, His close friends. He says, "and watch." I'm going to go a little further, He says. It says He went a little further and He fell on His face. You know He didn't trip, right? You recognize that. He didn't trip on something and fall. He was in agony. And laid prostrate on the ground, it says, and prayed, saying to the Father, He said, "My Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but yours." Listen, Jesus didn't want to do this, at least not now. He saw a cloud ahead, and He's asking for a vector, and God says, "We're going to have to go through this, man. I'm sorry. This was our plan." Jesus is thinking, isn't there another way? Can I have more time? This is stressful, and I don't know. With everything Jesus had, He was pleading that this could be done some other way. Because He knew how difficult this would be. And He said, "Not my will. If that's what you need me to do, that's what I'll do." Philippians chapter 2 verse 8 says, "And being found in human form, He humbled Himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even a death of the cross." Well, biblical love is obedient, but it's also selfless. Let Jesus, think about this as we talk about this aspect of biblical love, the selfless nature of it. I want to talk about the who and the how. I want to suggest to you first that Jesus loved and God loved the unlovable. We know this, Romans chapter 5. "For while we were still weak, at the right time, Jesus died for the ungodly. For one will scarcely die for a righteous person, though perhaps for a good person one would even dare to die. But God shows His love for us, in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. While we were His enemy, while we were living in sin, while we were rejecting Him and spitting in His face saying, "I want to do what I want to do," Jesus died. You know, I find it very interesting when I think about the cross. There was a man, or men, one probably held Jesus' arm and the other one probably put the nail into his hand. Then they moved to the other side, did the same thing. You know, Jesus allowed those men to drive those nails in His hands so that He could save them in the end. That is so divine to me. That is so beyond what we would do if we were writing this script. Jesus allowed those men to beat Him up and to beat His back and to put the crown of thorns on Him and to mock Him and to disrobe Him. He let them do all this so that He could die, so that He could save them. Man, that's loving the unlovable. You and I know that it's sometimes difficult to love those that we love. This is so next level love, that while we were still considered sinners, Christ died for us. He loved the unlovable. And I want you to know how He did it. You know how He did it. Luke chapter 10, verse 38. There's a lot of verses here that talk about it. He went about doing good and healing all who were oppressed. That was his method of going around and just helping people. He did this extensively. Matthew chapter 4, verse 23. Jesus went about through Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom. Listen, and healing every disease and every sickness among the people. You know what that means? That meant He went about healing every sickness and every disease. Matthew chapter 9, verse 35. Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and every sickness. When He saw the crowds, He had compassion on them. No doubt. No doubt some of the things that Jesus healed were the results of sinful living. I mean, I don't think it's a stretch to say that there was probably a guy in the crowd that the night before had fallen off his donkey and broke his shoulder because he was drunk. You know, Jesus didn't heal cancer. The scriptures teach us that he healed everything. And the mother that lost her temper and kicked the table and broke her toe, Jesus went about and healed that. I love the way that The Chosen, that series depicts. There's a scene that just resonated with me and made me think more about this idea where you see Jesus and this long line of people waiting to be healed. You know, I don't doubt that Jesus could have gotten them all in a big circle and said, bam, you're healed. And that would have been done. But I don't know that that's how it was. Maybe it was. But I like the idea that says these people were lined up. I think that's the way he would have done it. He would have wanted to look at them in their eyes. He wanted to have that connection with them so that their love might be more meaningful, or his love might be more meaningful to them. And he's doing this all day long. All day long. And the disciples are over here around the fire. They're just talking, chatting it up, relaxing. And it's dark now, and everybody has been healed for the day, and Jesus is walking by, and you can just tell that he's tired. And they invite him over, and he's just like, no, I'm done. I'm out. I'm worn out. That's the Jesus that I see. And I could be really wrong about that. But I don't think any of us can question the fact that his love was extensive, and he healed everyone. Well, quickly, I just want to talk about the sacrificial nature and the fact that it's shown, and we'll group those together because really it's hard to separate them because they are so interwoven. I want you to consider the fact, and these are tenets that you know very well, that biblical love truly is both sacrificial and it's also shown. Earlier in that Philippian chapter that I alluded to a moment ago in chapter 4, beginning at verse 7, the writer says, let each of you look not only to his own interests, oh, there's something about love there, but also to the interests of others, biblical love. Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality of God with a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. I wish I knew truly what it was that he emptied himself of. We'll know one day. But truly, there's no way for you and I to understand what it was that Jesus gave up, just in terms of where he was, to come to the earth. Heaven is everything that is the opposite of everything that is wrong with the world. Think about that. Think about what it is, where he was, and what it is that he gave up. Position. No sickness. No stress that I'm aware of. I mean, when I read about heaven, it sounds like a pretty cool place. No tears. No sorrows, total comfort. I don't know. I really don't know. But I know what Jesus gave up was everything to come and be a part of what we needed him to be. He gave up everything. He left everything. He also did everything, or should I say anything. I love this part of John chapter 13 when they're in the upper room. It's the night before his death. He's discussing with them his departure, and he institutes this Lord's Supper. It says, he laid aside his outer garments, and taking a towel, he tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin, began to wash the feet of the disciples, and he wiped them with a towel that was wrapped around him. Cannot think of much more of a humbling act, or of an act that would suggest what a true servant is in his eyes, than to go before each one of these men and wash their dirty feet. It's hard for me to imagine. It's hard for me to grasp that. I mean, it was a struggle for them. I mean, your feet are probably clean, and I don't want to see your feet. I don't want you to see my feet. And Peter struggled with that. He said, look, this isn't right. You're not going to do this to me, Lord. And Jesus said, you're going to have to go. If I can't do this for you and express to you what real biblical love looks like, then you're going to have to go. Peter got it then, didn't he? He said, okay, I'm in. Wash my head, whatever it takes. Here's my feet. What a humbling thing. Jesus would do anything, and he did everything to show people what really true biblical love looks like. Finally, he gave everything, didn't he? Not only did he leave everything, not only did he do everything, he gave everything. Hebrews chapter 12, beginning at verse 2. Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. The most horrible way, the most painful method that could be devised by humankind at that time was crucifixion. And that's biblical love. 1 John 3:16 says, by this we know love, that he laid his life down for us. What a beautiful verse. By this, we know love, that he laid down his life for us. Let's consider this morning as we partake of these emblems.